Thanks for tuning in and welcome back to the shop. If you're new here, this is our 2013 Mitsubishi Fuso FGB 72S. That is a four-wheel drive turbo diesel cab-over medium-duty truck. We are converting it into a camper. As you can see, this is a camper box that we're building, and today I am working on how we integrate the spare tire into the back of the camper. The 45-degree overhang that I created when I built the back of this box comes back 1 foot and up 1 foot. And that works out really well for this tire because it is also 12 inches wide. So the idea here is to create a pocket that is cut into the back of the overhang. So the wall out here will come up on a 45-degree angle, but behind the tire it will be vertical and then a horizontal cap. Now with this being a 35-inch tire, I don't want to make the cutout exactly 35 inches. I need a little bit of clearance because the box can move separate from the frame. But also, I'd like to give a little bit of room in case we do decide to go to a larger tire in the future, like a 37 or a 39. Probably not going to a 39. But that means I want to have a bit of extra room all the way around the outside. Now I do have a bit of future-proofing in this design. Right now this tire is sitting on a tray that is welded to the top of a piece of 2-inch box tube that is in the hitch receiver. If I need to gain a bit more width at the top and a little bit more height, I can rebuild this tray so that this tire sits 2 inches lower, or I can drop it down even farther than that. Obviously I don't want to drop it too low, but I do have the option in the future if I need to gain a couple more inches. For a rough start, I just grabbed a couple pieces of cardboard and kind of mocked things up how I wanted them to look. I had drawn this up in SketchUp before, but I wanted to see in reality how things would fit. After I did the rough mock-up, I went back to SketchUp and did a couple tweaks in my design, and what I've come up with is about a 14-inch wide section in the center, and then 6-inch flats that go out on a 22.5-degree angle each step, and that brings me down just outside the tire. What that means now is I've got to do some marking out, some cutting, and some bending to get the pieces that I need to weld together. And just as one final check before I start cutting expensive aluminum, I thought I'd do one more cut in cardboard to the dimensions that I actually have in CAD, and I'm glad I did because I make one more change. And that change was to go from a 14-inch wide piece in the middle back by an inch to a 12-inch wide piece, and I think it turns out looking significantly better. I'm laying these parts out on the material that's left over from what the main camper box components were made of. This is 1/8 inch thick 5083 aluminum, and I'm trying my best to nest these parts as tightly on the sheet as I can to minimize waste. Once laid out, I cut the parts using my DeWalt cordless saw, and this time I'm just going by eye. I'm not using any guides other than the line. Lastly, a quick clean of the cut edges using my grinder with a 60 grit flat disc. Now that I've got my pieces cut out, the next thing would be to bend them, but because of the surface on these, I want to do some surface prep to what will become the underside before I do the bends. After this is bent, it gets harder to do the surface prep on a curved surface, not really curved, but multiple bends on the inside. I'm not as worried about the outside because I'll very easily be able to get at that, and I'll be working on top instead of underneath. So I'm going to random orbit these without taking the bend lines off, and then I'll bend them in the press brake. I'm using a random orbit sander with 100 grit paper on it. This does a nice job of cleaning the surface and also hiding any small imperfections. It's quick and easy to do and easy to touch up in the future if needed. Oh, that's not right. I don't know if you caught the whoopsie that I discovered there, but the bend lines are laid out on the wrong side of this piece. Now it's not a big deal to flip the bend lines over to the other side, but the downside is this is the side of the aluminum that has all the baked on plastic that I was having such a hard time removing in a previous video. That means I'm going to have to take all the plastic off of this side, and I might as well do it to the other piece at the same time and random orbit both sides of all the pieces. With the plastic layer cleaned off and I've random orbited this surface, I've set this up in my press brake to do the first 90-degree bend. This is the piece that'll be sitting on top of the tire or above the tire. So this is a 90-degree bend to match the flange that's going to go across the full width of the back. With the first bend done, I've now clamped this temporarily onto my jig. And the next step is going to be to take this piece here and put two 22.5-degree bends in it. That's not going to be the easiest thing in the world on my press brake, so I'm going to have to do a lot of stopping and checking, rebending, maybe some unbending. But in order to help me with that, I'll be using my digital angle finder. Again, as I did in the last video, I'll throw a link in the description for this if you're interested in getting one. I'll also put a link in the description for the skill saw blade that I use to cut the aluminum. And as always, check out the descriptions because I throw a bit of useful information in there that if you're trying to repeat a project like this, might help you out. There are some Amazon links in there, and if you click through those links to purchase anything on Amazon, it does help me out, so I appreciate that. Thanks. After a little bit of persuading, we're sitting pretty much at 22.5, 22.6. That's close enough for what I'm doing. For the second bend, I'm going to try a little bit of a trick. This is a digital level, and right now you can see it's basically 0. I'm 0.05, if you can see that, if there's no glare on it. So now it's saying 0.05. And if I bring it out here, I should be getting about 22.5, which I am. That's 22.8. It's bouncing around a little bit, and depending on where I go on the plate, it's going to be a little bit different because the bend isn't 100% perfect. But theoretically, when this gets to 45, that means I have a 22.5-degree bend in here. Now the problem with aluminum is you have to over-bend it. So 45 is just going to give me an indication that I'm close, and I need to go a little bit farther to have a bit of spring back after I release it from the press brake. Hang on a minute here. Some of you probably figured out that what I just said and did was completely wrong and will lead to a significant overbending of the part. If you figured it out and caught my mistake, throw it down in the comments below and let's see what you think. Don't worry, I did figure it out. Here's the bent part, straightened out, set up in place. I think it came out all right. So what we've got here is a 12-inch piece on the top and then approximately 22.5-degree bends every 6 inches. Got to make a second one of those and then bend the back lip into the top part. Let's try this again. I'm not sure why it's so hard to see this display. Let's see if I can tweak the video and edit to make it any easier. Making it darker. Nope, that doesn't help. That doesn't help. Nope, that definitely doesn't help. Maybe I'll just put some numbers on the screen. This is a really good visual of how much spring-back aluminum has. When I release the press brake, the bend recoils significantly. Adding more bend and then allowing it to relax will get me where I need it to be, so about 16 degrees, and it comes back down to about 11.5. Did you catch what I did differently from last time? Well, there it is, mocked up just enough that I can take it back apart and put the last bend in the top piece. With all three parts temporarily in place, it's a good last visual check. I think this is going to come out just fine. With everything bent up and test fit, it's time to drag out the TIG welder and start tacking this together. Once again, I forgot to flip the control switch, so my foot pedal had no control over the temperature. It was all or nothing. A quick flip of the switch and all was back to normal. Next, I need to make some long strips, so I've jumped back on my stomp shear, quite literally. My stomp shear is a really useful piece of equipment, but as you can see, it's a little bit more work to make the long cuts. Shorter cuts like this one are pretty easy. Longer cuts still work, but it takes more work. Now, depending on what section of the blade I'm using, some areas are sharper, some areas have more momentum. It could take 1, 2, 3, even 4 stomps to get through this. Let's see how lucky I get this time. This is, by the way, probably the only tool that the fatter you are, the better it works. So it looks like I got just past halfway. So hopefully the second stomp takes it the rest of the way through. 2 stomps. And a whole bunch of stomps later, I've got a couple more strips of aluminum. These 2 are 3 inches wide. They're going to get 1 bend down the middle, and they're going to form the upper half. These are 1.5 inches wide, and they're going to go across the bottom. Before I can do any of that, I need to random orbit both sides of all 4. For the 1.5 inch wide piece that's got to go across the bottom, what I've done is clamped it temporarily to the outer piece to match the angle. And now I just need to make a cut along here. I'm just going to use this 1/2 inch piece of wood as a guide. And that's the angle that I'm going to need to trim that so that it can slide in here. Now it's right now sticking out past here, so once I get that butted up properly and get the angle right, I'll simply do a straight cut over here, and that piece will fit exactly how I need it to. Couple tacks on that, it should be good to go. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Now you may have noticed that I didn't weld either of these pieces to the actual tire surround. And that is because I've got to weld on the inside of this, and that's much easier to do if I just remove this whole thing. So right now I'm fitting these pieces, and I'm about to bend the upper pieces. Once those are all in place, this will come back out to get fully welded. Before I can weld in the last 2 upper pieces, I need to bend them to 45 degrees along their length. Sometimes my eyeballs surprise me, but I say that's pretty close to 45 degrees. 45.2. That's not bad, considering both of these came out to 45 and that was just eyeballs. Pretty happy with that. Now what I've got to do is fit the inboard edge to the spare tire cutout, tack these in place, and weld everything. I think this part's going to get a little bit difficult because I have to support this in line with where it's going to be, but also trim off this on the angle that's going to match that, while at the same time being at the right height. Well, how about this for an idea? I want to run this along here, and I can overlap it back here. If I get rid of that clamp, get this to sit in line with where it's going to be here, and in line with where it's going to be over there, maybe, and then clamp this back together with all 3 pieces there. I think now if I extend that distance back here from there, that should give me my angle. So if I've got a 2 3/8 gap up here, and I transfer that to where it's touching, and come back 2 3/8, and then trim that angle, I think that will fit here. Well, I'd say that worked. I'd say that worked really well. I think you get the idea of what's going on here. I've got to repeat this on the other side, just as I repeated this from over there. Once I've got this all fit together, this is coming apart, it's going to get welded, put back together. Now, make sure you stay tuned because episode 75, something big is going to happen. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.